Welcome to the Below the Line podcast. My name is David Duggan, and I'm one of the members of a team made up of experts from the worlds of business, elite sport, adventure, and health and well-being. We are coaches, mentors, and advisors to some of the world's biggest companies and organizations, as well as smaller businesses, entrepreneurs, and people looking to make their mark in the world. Whether it's leadership, business, coaching, health, or simply life in general, we're really talking about performance, our ability to show up as brilliantly as possible into all of these situations for ourselves and those around us. Each week, I sit down with a member of our team or an invited guest to discuss a performance-related topic connected to their area of expertise. We keep it short and sweet so that you can extract all the good stuff and get on with the rest of your day, and hopefully put some of our knowledge, experience, and expertise into play for yourself. This week, I'm talking to a very special guest, Lisa Nicole Dunne, an organisational consultant and strategist whose business, Mantra Strategy, focuses on helping organisations with projects related to purpose, impact, and change for societal good. I wanted to talk to Lisa Nicole about what, if anything, has changed about how organisations approach strategy development based on her experience of working with businesses over the last 18 months, and what advice she has for any team or company seeking to devise and develop a strategy as we continue to work using remote and hybrid working arrangements. When it comes to developing strategy, Lisa Nicole suggests that organisations should always link this process back to their purpose and continuously check their activities against this big reason for existence. As well as this, where possible, she recommends people in organisations getting back together in the same physical space to bring energy, enthusiasm and passion to the strategy development process, particularly if the experience of COVID-19 has forced organisations to rethink or reinvent what they do or how they do it. You can subscribe at www.belowtheline.ie, where you can stay up to date with our podcast, as well as exclusive online events and sessions, including our Press Pause coaching community. Thanks for listening, and see you next week. Okay, so look, I'll just start with that first question then. So is there anything that COVID-19 has changed about how organizations develop strategy? Tell me what you see, Lisa Nicole, as someone with your kind of consultant strategist hat on.
Yeah, I think a lot of organizations are reflecting, and there was probably an element of panic at the beginning in terms of, the overuse of the word pivot and how that fed into strategy. But what I guess is interesting for me is that strategy is really, at the end of the day, all about the long-term goals and the course of action that will get you to that place. So, what course of action, what allocation of resources are needed to achieve your longer term goals. So that's kind of that's an age-old, definition from 1962 or something, Alfred Chandler. So what COVID did was made people really think, okay, should we be doing something totally different? And probably get in a room more often or virtual room more often, thinking about, okay, what do we need to do now? That's not necessarily strategy. And I suppose it's absolutely business management and planning and, all of that. But I guess, I think in COVID, people started to reflect on whether they should change what the definition of strategy is and look in a more short-term way. So what we would have seen is people questioning, should they be doing a 3 to 5 year strategy at all? And I know that was around before COVID, but, should they be doing that longer term thinking? And should they be doing a transitional strategy or an interim kind of strategy? And I guess from our perspective, we would say the whole purpose of strategy, and there are a few things that it contributes to, the whole purpose is to have that guiding star, that kind of connection with overall purpose that helps you decide what to do and what not to do. And so actually, I would say having it in a period like COVID or a pandemic or some major is actually all the more important. Doesn't mean to say you can't have agility and you can't have flexibility around what you do and some of the tactics and the shorter term kind of functional needs that a business has. But strategy is an iterative process. It is about preparing for the future. And it is about kind of giving you distinction. So I think what COVID did was challenge people to think, do I have time to be thinking long term when I don't even know what's around the corner? And I think that's true. But strategy always takes into account some kind of assumptions and predictions, and looks at, like, a strategy done really well looks outside, looks at the context, looks at, your past and all of that good stuff. So, from our perspective, COVID changed people's thinking about it in the immediate terms, but we are seeing an absolute influx of people now thinking, okay, we really need to get back to what is our long term thinking again. And I think that's good, because it should never really have gone away.
So if I just picking up on what you said there, you've probably seen a lot of organizations almost do, it hasn't been strategizing, but it's been, crisis management maybe over the last 18 months. They're coming out of that now. So what are you seeing in terms of how organizations are deciding to develop strategy? Because it still is so uncertain right now.
Yeah. And I think, what we are seeing more of is people taking that, giving themselves that time and space, which is really important. So the ability to reflect, taking time out, planning in a strategy away day, that's kind of, they haven't been done so much, and they've been done virtually like the rest of our lives, but it's not quite the same as being in a room, as people, in my opinion anyway. So what we're seeing is, we're seeing people move from the kind of, okay, what's the 1 year plan, to, really having a workshop that actually allows them that space to reflect, to think about purpose, to really revisit, the mission, to have done the input piece around, where are we, and mapping kind of the impact they're having now. What's working? Are some of those going to be remaining? Some of those new things, that they're going to remain in the future strategy? So we're seeing organizations get together again, is what I would say. And we're out the door with inquiries for strategy workshops. And I suppose helping people kind of look at, aligning more. So aligning the kind of immediate and the longer term. So so I'd say strategy workshops, and we kind of package those in mantra more with, with purpose at the core. So, the mantra is all about, purpose at the core of a strategy, and about thinking about what your belief is, what should guide you forward. And that's not just intended for, for good organizations that are, motivated about social impact or purpose. That's about organizations, large and small, thinking about why they exist and to what end they're all aligned. And that's, I think, a really critical thing around, how do you make sure you don't get lost in the day to day? And that's about, what are you all there for? At the end of the day, what are the fundamentals? So we're seeing more people book in for kind of that reflection piece, strategy workshops as a starting point, and then kicking off a period of strategic thinking. As I said, we had heard a lot of people say, should this be a transitional strategy? Should we be thinking about 2 years? And I guess from our perspective, we're now getting more and more people realizing, no, we need more stability than that. We need to distinguish ourselves more than what we would do in a short term thinking. And we really need to prepare for the future in a kind of more long-term way, and give everyone in the organization that overall kind of reference point or guiding star. So a lot more people are engaging mantra, and I'm sure many others, in that whole facilitation process around what's our 3 to 5 year trajectory again. And I think that's a really positive kind of development.
Yeah. It sounds to me as well that for some of these teams, it's almost a process of just, getting back in the room again, but saying, revisiting our purpose and checking, versus, reflecting on the last 18 months, is that still what we should be doing? And if it is, great. And if it's not, let's just readjust it and think about it in a more long-term context.
Yeah, I think so. Reconnecting is the word we've been using, because when you reflect, a lot of the time you do, if your strategy was really solid in the first place, and the reason you're set up your business, or the reason your kind of strategy has taken a particular route over a number of years, if that was sound, you'll tend to reflect and go back to the core of that a lot of the time. Or, unless there's been major shifts of sand in your market and so on. So yeah, reconnecting with that original purpose and then really, really reflecting on how you can best achieve that in the current context and in the context of what's likely in the next few years. So, and a few months, obviously, as well. So yeah, I think you're right. It's like really about taking the time to give yourself, I keep using the word space, but give yourself and your management team, your leadership team, your board, whatever way you structure your kind of strategic thinking process, give your key stakeholders that freedom to think. And often, as we all know, it's been such a crazy period. We're barely getting to think. You're kind of, the fight and flight is true. The reality is you're juggling so many things right now. We're all living a very different life, I think, to what we were. And so a strategic kind of checkpoint, a strategic process, a strategic workshop, whatever that looks like and whatever feels right for your organization or your particular budget even, and your team that you have at the time, any of those are going to serve a really strong purpose of that reconnection, reflection, and then adoption, or as you talk about, that iterative kind of change process as needed.
Yeah. And look, you've spoken about the organizations that you work with, right? But you've been at the top of organizations. You've led out things like fundraising strategies or merger strategies. Based on your experience of doing that type of stuff, what's your guidance for leaders who, once strategy has been finalized or sorted, how do they communicate it and how do they lead it, in your view?
That's a great question. And I suppose I think it really talks to the how do you go about creating your strategy, who is at the table, how are others inputting, how are you listening to need to. We use the model of like, wish, what if, to really engage stakeholders and draw them out on what's working really well. What do you like? What do you wish was easier, bigger, better, that you could do more of, that really could grow. And finally, looking at imagining, what if there were no, excuse me, there were no limitations? What does that look like? What's the paradise island, And so I think when an organization leadership team engage all the right people in the process, they don't have to think about how am I going to communicate this. They're going to think about how am I onboarding people? How am I keeping them with me? How am I sure this is something that we all believe in? And so it's more of a rally cry when it's built on the right level of input. It's more of a kind of, come on, let's do this, as opposed to, well, I have to tell you why we need to change. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's really all about how you start the process, who you talk to. And we help a lot with that planning and what the purpose of the process is. So is it strategy for strategy development's sake, for the guiding kind of star because it needs a refresh? Is it regulatory that you absolutely need to have your strategic plan written, documented in a certain way for certain stakeholders or whatever? Or actually, are you doing this because we want the team together to dream and to really rally and to think about purpose and to connect with kind of how you're making a difference in, your market, with your product, or in the world, whatever that might look like. So for me, it's always been, bringing people along. Merger processes, as you say, are, hugely tricky and very sensitive. But overall, I think once you're being really open all the way through and you have, very clear communication channels throughout the process, and they're getting regular updates and they feel they have a voice, everyone in that. It doesn't mean you can always take every voice on board, but to hear it, to understand it, whether that's through survey or whether that's through, actual workshops. Cross-functional workshops work really well. We do a lot of that. We call them our purpose pits. And they're really where that's what you're talking about and you're hearing people through. We really think the communication is going to fall from that very naturally if you do that stage right.
What is your advice for any organization or any leader who's kicking off a strategy process? Is there a top 2 or 3 things that you think, look, do this, and not that it won't fail, but if you do it this way, you stand a greater chance of success?
I definitely think, don't be too insular in your thinking is my first guidance. Like, put the time in, do the research, look outside for inspiration, look outside for what others are doing. Don't ignore the data is what I'd always say. Like, data-led strategy makes huge sense. So, that's horizon scanning, but also, looking at your own data, looking at your competitors, looking at all that stuff. So, we have a number of products we do, like Snow White sessions, that are really about getting people in the organization to also help name who they watch, and then doing detailed research on those organizations, so that you're not just doing your strategy based on what you think yourselves. I think that is really important. The second one for me is around that kind of cross-functional engagement, bottom up, top down. It doesn't really matter like what structure your organization has, if you're hierarchical or not. Find a way to listen to the voices of many, and to reflect on what your possibilities are from listening to the people you have, because our teams are the ones who are closest to what's going on, and who are going to be able to really have huge contributions to make in terms of simple things that actually might be being missed as well. So that's the second. And then I guess the third thing I would say about strategy is, really allow yourself the time and space. So I keep coming back to this, time to allow this process take place. So it could be just as simple as 3 half-day workshops that are mapped in with gaps in between. But it's that reflection space in between where people have, I use the word ruminate a lot, where you have time to ruminate and really think about, is that what we're all about? And have somebody drive your process, that whether it's internal or with an external partner, like a strategy firm like ourselves, or not, have someone who's going to challenge you and be open to that challenge. Because otherwise you could just find yourself doing strategy development as a checkbox exercise. And then, and this is maybe a little aside, you asked for 3 and I've given 3, but I'm going to squeeze another one in, is that quite often we find organizations think about their strategy and courses of action to deliver those goals and the allocation of resources. But then they also start rolling that out and then add on lots of other like projects or work streams or kind of committee-led ideas, concepts, initiatives that are very important to the organization, but they're not necessarily embedded in their strategy. And a good example of this is kind of the diversity and inclusion kind of strategies, or any ESG type. Sustainability is often core, but and more we're starting to see boards and investors really care about this stuff, so they're naturally sitting as core. But some of the other things like workplace well-being and the culture, they're kind of seen almost as small parts of how we'll do it. And I think, this is a real opportunity in a post-pandemic world to really embed those as core parts of the enablers that are going to deliver your strategy, rather than bolt-ons or separate small things dealt with by kind of cross-functional committees or, volunteer committees. Really embed those. And I think that will really help set your organization apart. And strategy is supposed to do that, distinguish us, as well as give stability, as well as help us prepare for the future. So really embedding all the things that make your organization tick and who you are, and propel yourselves forward with that kind of purpose is a really, really healthy way to start your process.
Last question, strategy development in kind of the rest of this year and into 2022. Are there any kind of trends that you see organizations kind of following, or any traps that you see them falling into?
Oh gosh, I think from a trends point of view, like strategy development has stood the test of time, is what I would say. In terms of, the those stages of kind of input and, stakeholder engagement, and then, horizon, the insight and horizon scanning and so on. So I don't think that will majorly change in terms of the process, but a lot of organizations are doing that kind of more, giving themselves kind of shorter periods of time before they come back to the table. So, what is our strategy on a page or our SOAP? What are our kind of purpose proof points, and how are we monitoring those as organizations? And I think organizations that check in with that a little bit more than, we'll come back in 2.5 years and have a mid-strategic review, I think that's a useful kind of new departure. Or, a lot of organizations live their strategy a little bit more frequently, but not everyone. Some literally create it and then don't embed it into how they manage the business as much as they could. So that's one. And I suppose, I guess always be allocating some resources to allowing the team have time to do reflection as they go through. So, in theory, when you're looking at annual budgets, you should be also able to do a quick check-in on whether your assumptions, your projections from like the overall pest analysis you've done in strategic thinking, does that still hold true? Is there major things coming down the tracks that we need to be aware of? Or are there kind of major risks that are kind of emerging? So I think that's worth keeping an eye on. And the other thing I would say, if you're really, really looking to succeed, is ESG, environmental, social, and governance kind of goals and strategies are way more important now than they ever were before. So how are you living those? That's a really important kind of trend, and I think should be really core to businesses, because the more we really live those values and live those values and goals, the more we can all aspire to have a better world. That's me with my mantra hat on. Like, we're all about trying to make communities and society better, and business has a role to play in that. So I think that's a trend we like, is that like ESG is kind of rising in its importance, and not just to shareholders, but to, management teams as well. And I'd love to see more management teams kind of reach out and get in touch about how they can start to really live that.
Fantastic. Listen, thank you very, very much for sharing your time and your thoughts and your views. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on. Delighted to be here.